Great, so I think we'll get underway. I think we'll call the regular meeting of Township Council for Monday, January 15th to order. Of course, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular acknowledge our valued relationships with the Kwantlen, Katzie, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. With that, can I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Grandpopta. Any discussion on the agenda? None. Call the question on A1. That carries unanimously. Get a motion to adopt the minutes from the regular council meeting of December 18th. Moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Call the question on B1. Carries unanimously. Get a motion, please, to adopt the public hearing meeting minutes from December 18th. Moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Call the question on B2. Carries unanimously. Item E1, Agricultural Land Commission application number 100407. You get a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on E1? Seeing none, call the question on E1. That carries unanimously. Item E2, capital request for 2024 traffic calming program update. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Councillor Grandpopta, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to move an amendment.
Okay, seeing no other speakers, go ahead.
That council authorize $200,000 in additional funding from the capital projects reserve for further traffic calming measures at the 10 identified locations and for additional locations for council to consider.
Is there a seconded by Councillor Pratt? Go ahead. Any discussion?
Nope.
No? Is there any discussion on that?
Well,
amendment?
sorry. There's a few things that I think that we should add. There's a few items that you still hear about, and I would like to just actually see this safety item furthered.
Great. Councillor Martins?
Thank you. I'm really happy to see this. Always supportive of traffic calming and slowing down drivers and protecting our pedestrians and people, active transportation like bicycles. When we're talking about funding, one source that's not mentioned in the report, but I have followed up with staff, is the possibility of ICBC. And just the information I received is that the funding programs with ICBC typically open up for applications in late spring and early summer, and will prioritize the applications approved by council. So I think that's great if we are getting on that and approving these projects and then reaching out to ICBC, because I understand they have assisted in the past with several of these traffic calming, so we don't necessarily need to use the money that we set aside. So that will be a welcome addition to this.
Councillor Pratt?
Thank you, Your Worship. And yeah, I wanted to thank staff for getting this back to us quickly and recognizing that it's a priority for all of council. So I just wanted to say appreciate that and look forward to continuing.
Seeing no other speakers, call the question on the amendment for additional funding. It carries unanimously. Back to the main motion as amended. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. In light of the addition of another $200,000 to the budget for traffic calming, I'd like to move two separate additions to the list of the currently identified sites. The first being an addition of a raised crosswalk at the intersection of 204 B Street and 78 Avenue in front of Donna Gabriel Robbins Elementary. There's currently a painted crosswalk, and if we're adding speed bumps there, I think it's appropriate to add a raised crosswalk. And the second would be at the crossing of the Langley Lane Greenway on 213 Street, which would provide safer access to the off-leash dog park as well as the greenway itself. And again, because we're adding speed bumps there in the area, I think it'd be appropriate to have a raised crosswalk for added pedestrian safety. Thank you.
You wish to make that amendment for two additions?
Two additions to the current.
Yeah, in scope. Do you
Yes.
have an amendment ready to go, or can you try to word that into an amendment?
I can word that into amendment now.
Go ahead.
Go to the list. That council directs staff to add raised crosswalk to the list of preliminary traffic calming measures for Donna Gabriel Robbins Elementary School. I'll move that as one, and then I'll move the second one.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on that addition? Seeing none, call the question on that amendment. That carries unanimously. Go ahead if you have a second one.
And the second one would be that council directs staff to add raised crosswalk to the list of preliminary traffic calming measures for dog off-leash park.
Great. Is there a seconder to that?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councillor Martins. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, call the question on E2. And back to the main motion as amended. Anything else, Councillor Pratt?
That's it. Thank you.
Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on E2 as amended. That carries unanimously. Item E3, capital request for sewer lift station additional funding. I'll move it. Seconded by Councillor Rent. Councillor Coons, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, 350,000 over is one of the estimates that it was higher than the estimate. Through your worship to our staff, are we seeing more and more of those sorts of estimates not like being a lot higher than or lower than what we can actually do it for? And or is that going to have an impact on, going forward on our budget? And
Mr. Braga?
Yeah, Mr. Zweig, could you comment, I guess, on the current state of the, procurements in terms of what you're seeing and also on the economy?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just focusing on the most recent tenders we had through engineering, whether it be water, sewer, roads. Ever since the pandemic, 2020, we've been seeing a steady increase. It's not a fixed percentage. It's fluctuated depending on how hungry the industry is, how many other bids are open for tender. This is somewhat semi-specialized work with respect to lift station, so the estimate was at least 2 years old, and now the recent tenders came in. I guess that's about $300,000 to $350,000 more, so not able to award the contract. We're looking for some additional funding. Whether that, if we tender next, will be the same increase, it's hard to predict, Your Worship.
okay, so I guess yeah, no, that answered my question. It's just that I feel like if we continue to see these really high bids, that we may need to put more in our budget for these sorts of public works, I guess.
Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, just anecdotally, when I'm going out to tender and bidding and getting results, most trades and most companies are only holding their numbers for 30 days. So when we're going to when we're looking at our budgets and stuff, it's very hard to be able to hold the numbers because of the nature of the industry right now.
Seeing no other discussion, call the question on E3. That carries unanimously. Item E4, capital request, Metro Vancouver Jericho Reservoir Phase 1. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Bailey. I'll just, Mr. Zweig, maybe give this a bit of an explanation.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that. This is a project that was completed by Metro Vancouver. The entire reservoir is owned and operated by Metro Vancouver. As part of regional and agreements that we have with them, this included a basic cost share contribution by the Township of Langley of 66.28, with the City of Surrey contributing the remainder. But it's based on the actual construction cost of this reservoir. The actual costs are essentially complete. We received the 2023 invoice, and we need to pay them approximately $4.8 million. We anticipate one final invoice to be forwarded this year in the next couple of months, at which point in time we'll have to come back to council for one final authorization.
Great. Councillor Richter?
Yes, through you to staff, I was just wondering, how high are the final costs that are not yet determined likely to be? Are we going to be looking at another $4 million expenditure out of the fund?
Thank you, Your Worship. Preliminary numbers suggest it could be in the range of up to $1.7 million. There's a few outstanding items still to be sorted out at the Metro level.
Okay. And what is the balance remaining in the water reserve?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll defer to Finance, who's currently looking up the number.
Okay, thank you.
You want to wait for that number? There's no other speakers.
With the additions in the current year, we should have about 4.1 million.
Thank you. Call the question on E4. That carries unanimously. Item F1, bylaws for first and second reading, development, rezoning application number 100261, development permit number 101250, bylaw number 5969, 5970, for the development of 260 apartment units. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Van Popte. Councillor Van Popte, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it was in November we asked for updated policy on regarding apartments and condos regarding the square footage and ratios of 3-bedroom suites. Does this application and the next one, which is F2, meet that policy?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Van Popte. As you've noted, that policy has not been finalized. The current application, the other application in that regard, has not been reviewed against that policy as it currently doesn't exist. From memory, the unit mixes here are mostly 1 bedrooms, and then following that, all the way up to 3 bedrooms, Your Worship.
So one option would be to look at this again at third reading and get an update on where we're going to see that recommendation come back.
Yeah, I'd like to do that and see how close we are to getting that policy update when it comes to third.
Be one option.
Okay.
Councillor Richter?
Yes, I just want to confirm that these 260 apartment units are going to be rental units. Is that correct?
Mr. Richardson?
Through to Your Worship, not currently anticipated for rental.
Okay. And the other question that I had, there seems to be a growing trend towards putting green roof amenities, like patio areas on top of buildings. And I'm just wondering, has that been contemplated as an amenity area for this building?
Mr. Richardson?
Thank you, through Your Worship. Staff work, the neighborhood plan policy, as well as staff in general, support those types of uses. So yes, it has been contemplated.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on F1. That carries unanimously. Item F2, official community plan amendment, rezoning application number 100237, bylaw number 5974, 5975 for 273 apartment units. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Rent. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion on F2? Councillor Richter.
Yeah, will any of these units, 273 units, I believe, will any of them be rental units?
Mr. Richardson?
Through Your Worship, Councillor Richter, not currently anticipated as rental.
Okay, and also green roofs, green roof patio area amenity, has that been contemplated for these buildings as well?
Through Your Worship, Councillor Richter, correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Martins?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm in support of this application. More of a general comment question for staff, if maybe we can consider reviewing or communicating with the school board with regards to schools in that neighborhood. It seems there's a lot of density coming. I'm not aware of any schools contemplated right in that north corner. So I am concerned about it. I recognize the need for housing, and I do not want to stand in the way of that. But I hope that perhaps that might be taken into consideration as we move forward.
Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question on F2. That carries unanimously. G1, temporary borrowing bylaws, bylaw number 5981. I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rint. Is there any discussion on G1? Seeing none, call the question on G1. That carries with Councillor Richter, Councillor Kunst opposed. Item H1, rezoning application number 100734, bylaw number 5944. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Rint, seconded by Councillor Pratt. Is there any discussion on H1? Seeing none, call the question on H1. And that's defeated with Councillor Richter, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Van Popte, Councillor Martins, Councillor Ferguson opposed. Item I1, bylaws for final adoption, Langley 2024-2028 5-year financial plan, bylaw number 5976, 5977. I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion on I1? Seeing none, Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that this is the plan that's going to have the 7% tax increase in it?
Mr. Backen?
That is 7.01%.
7.01, okay. I was actually quite amazed by the amount of input that came in from the public on this one. Several pages of comments, and just in reading through those comments, I don't sense that there's an overwhelming support from the public for some of the expenditures in this plan. I just wanted to make that observation. Thank you.
I have an amendment, two amendments. So we'll make the first one. I did hear the council loud and clear in regarding to leaving the 2 additional RCMP officers in the 2024 budget, despite the fact that they likely won't be filled and would likely end up in the city of Langley. However, I think it's appropriate to consider a change here. So I have an amendment that the effective start date for 2 additional RCMP officers be changed to October 1st, 2024. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. Open that up. So the rationale here is they'll still be within the budget. They'll still arrive this year, but this would reduce the tax increase down by 0.07. Is there any discussion on that? Councillor Martins.
Thank you. I'm not sure, again, why police are being targeted. Talking about the input, I too read through the comments from the community on the budget, and one of the overwhelming themes is increase in crime and disorder, and a need for more public safety. I'm not clear on the comment that they're going to go to the city. I have not heard directly from the RCMP at this table as to what they have done with the people that they've hired so far, where they have assigned them, or where they intend to put these 2 people. And RCMP resources deployment are not just about patrol. It doesn't work like other emergency services where they are located in a certain, the entire shift is in one location. It works very differently, and I fear that these comments are taking away from the overwhelming message that we receive. It was number 2 priority on this budget in the input we received from people, crime and disorder. So I do not support this. We need police officers. Our community is growing very quickly, and we are already behind on that.
Councillor Richter.
Yeah, that was clearly one of the resounding themes that came through in the public feedback, the feeling that the public is not thinking that Langley's as safe as it could be, and the need for more policing resources. So I'm opposed to this particular amendment. I think the policing resources are something that the public wants.
Councillor Bailey.
Well, I think I really made my feelings felt on the last time this went around. And believe me, when there's anything that's going to go against public safety, this is incredibly tough. So, what does this take that budget down to?
Well, they are still in the budget. It delays the hiring by 1 quarter, and that would reduce it from 7.01 to 6.94. And then I have a subsequent amendment to try to get it a little bit lower. So they're still in the budget. They're still being added to the budget for this year, and they'd be planned to be filled 3 months later than currently contemplated on June 1st. They'd be added to, or July 1st, they'd be added on October 1st instead. Just a small delay.
Has there been any discussion with the head of the RCMP about the ability to fill these spots?
Mr. Bracken, I believe we've both heard that it's challenging.
Well, that's correct, Your Worship. The numbers coming out of Depot were still somewhat reduced, so the question becomes then, are there any that could be provided during the current cycles? And the answer is unknown. So what we do know is that by past cycles, usually it's later in the year, such as October, before they arrive, and I believe that's what the motion's addressing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, through the chair, maybe Mrs. Director Ruff can answer, but I don't really expect her to. Going back, I guess, a few years, what percentage, if I may, through the chair, maybe Mr. Backen, have we on our budget for police? And what was it 10 years ago? And do you have the information, how it's progressed over the years, the percentage on our budget?
I'll give it a try. The overall protective services, I guess, contribution is rising significantly. That, of course, includes both fire and police. In the situation of policing, it really is a ratio dependent upon the number of members we add. And where we're, I guess, lacking somewhat is, off the top of my head, I can't remember how many members we've added in the last 5 years. It's significant. I'm going to estimate it's probably around 2025, and we can certainly verify that. And when you look at the costing associated with those members, usually when you take into account equipment, timing, training, benefits, and all those things, we use a round number of about $200,000. I think it's slightly less than that, but you can see that our contribution has been quite significant in the past.
And is one of the large, if I may supplemental, the costs within our budget or percentages within our budget, both protection, police, fire, and bylaws now, if I may?
That's correct. If you were to look at them independent of the capital budget, we would see those as operating costs as probably being amongst the most significant.
Now, I wouldn't want to let people listening in or hearing think that the Township of Langley doesn't care about protection or policing or public safety. We have done over the time I've been on council, increased our numbers, increased our bylaws, put new buildings, new offices, new capital, other infrastructure. The list has gone on and on and on, and you won't have to be a genius to figure out the magnitude of money that we put towards protection. Now, by the same token, I know that the Township of Langley is not in the news every night in confusion regarding what other communities are doing with police and other services, but those are not our challenges. We have our own, and we are progressing accordingly, and safety is important to this community, and certainly as long as I've been on council, it's been important. So we'll continue on driving forward for protection, and I appreciate the concerns of the citizens regarding public safety, because it's paramount. Thank you very much.
Councillor Van Popta?
Yeah, through your worship to staff, just to clarify, we are, on top of these additional 2, we are already hiring 3 this year?
5, actually.
5.
So the 5
So
are-
this is
just to
from
clarify,
5 to 7, and we're just asking for those last 2
Just
to
to
be
clarify,
delayed.
because just make sure we get the right information on the table. We added 5 in last year's budget that were annualized across 2023 and 2024. So for 2023, there were 5 positions, and then in 2024, those are still being added to the budget. So we are still adding 7 RCMP over 2 years.
Okay, so this
So I
isn't,
think some of this commentary is obviously intended for one purpose, which we'll just leave there.
okay, so we are actually increasing. All we're doing is just aligning the dates with something that's more realistic of when they're actually going to arrive, which the number one comment in the feedback was the affordability of our tax increase. And if the reality is that we're not going to receive these officers until most likely October, then it makes sense to align the start date with October to help bring that percentage of our tax increase to bring it down. We're looking for any ways that we can reduce our property tax increase. This is one of those ways it's practical. It's not going to affect the safety because we are still hiring them. And it's just moving it to a more practical start date.
So if we remember, deferring them to 2025 could have been a January 1st start date versus what we have now, which is July 1st. This would be essentially picking the point in the middle and leaving them within the budget to be finalized and annualized next year. I think, it's important to remind, I think everybody, this has been a challenging budget at this 7% mark because of a $4.3 million download from Ottawa. No commentary on the local detachment or local members, but it is resulting in, it is a $4.3 million download from Ottawa for a variety of things, which we have, which are not discretionary. That's 2.63% of the 7.01. And then in addition to that, we're annualizing the 5 officers from last year. And then in addition to that, we're adding 2 more within this budget. So I think to say that we're not investing in public safety, we're not moving forward with investing in what the RCMP requires as required by Ottawa, that we're not continuing to add officers in pace of development, just simply isn't factual. Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, through your worship to staff, what is that percentage and what is that, how does that sort of, what would be the money per person in the township who pays taxes? What would that cost them for 1 to 2, the 2 police officers?
Mr. Backen?
If you're looking for a per household impact, I don't have that.
Okay. I guess my point here is really, I don't think this is really about 1 officer, 2 officers. Like if we really we're wanting to make sure that the taxes were lower, we could probably find, you know, other places to sort of to look at. You know, this past year we've added just an incredible amount of money to the budget, and these 2 police officers, like for me, that's not really what it's all about. So I can't support this. You know, if we really want to reduce that number, I say we look in, you know, other envelopes and other things that, you know, we have attached large numbers of dollars to, and I'm not supporting just taking out the 2 police officers.
Yeah, so I'm going to correct that. We're not taking them out. We're changing the start date. So it'd be inaccurate to say we're taking them out. And, you know, I will remind council so far, Councillor Kunst, that I'm the only one to make an amendment. Councillor Martins, go ahead. Councillor Martins, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I think along the lines of what Councillor Kunst was saying, it would be helpful. I feel in these budget discussions, it's been difficult for me because sometimes we're talking dollar amounts and sometimes we're talking percentages. I would like to know by the delay to October, so I think we're talking a matter of months, what is the actual dollar amount that saves us on these 2 police officers? Because I think if I remember correctly what the mayor said, they were originally supposed to come midway through the year, if I'm correct. Sorry, I might have misunderstood that, June or July, and now it's moving to October. So how much money does that actually practically save?
Ms. Ruff?
That will save us $114,000.
Okay, so we're splitting hairs over $114,000. So I'm going to push back a little bit on this one. I'm not sure why we're focused on this item. I feel we debated it pretty thoroughly last meeting. I feel we, as a council, voted months ago to go ahead with this. And I'm really perplexed because I think for the number of responses we had about people who are concerned about crime and disorder, $114,000 is really not a big price tag. So, and I feel that if we, like Councillor Kuntz said, I think if we could have a look at the line items comparing dollar to dollar, not dollars to percents, I do believe that we could easily find those savings somewhere else that does not impact people's safety and considers crime in our community, and something that we hear regularly from people is important. So that is my point of view. Take it or leave it.
Councillor Bailey?
This is an amendment, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so I'll be having an amendment after the vote, please.
Okay, I'll let you done. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I think that I don't look at budgets as being cutting straws or being silly. I think every bit of the budget is important. The same question I'm going to keep asking, well, I won't keep asking, it keeps up every year. Mr. Backen, is it not true that every year we ask for RCMP on a certain date, they don't always come that date? They're always delayed, if I may, is that correct?
I would say usually delayed. There have been a couple of years over the last 25 or so where they were on time, but that's, again, a different time. Right now, we're looking at staffing challenges post-COVID, and they're continuing to recover. So I think it's safe to say that we expect there will be some challenges in filling these positions, and that the timing is likely to be later than we hoped.
So, so regardless of that, I mean, the reality is what we've seen over the years is there has been a delay. It's no one trying to hold back on public safety. What we also have done is we've done an awful lot of other things in protection regarding fire and bylaws, and sometimes bylaw folks are helping the RCMP, and that's, again, another safety concern. That's property use, damage to buildings, help with fire, and the list goes on. I don't want to talk about what a bylaw officer does, but they help out the police all the time. So we are doing everything in our power to help residents out. Can we stop crime? That's a tough one. I have to leave that up to those in charge of those. But I don't think we're not doing the right thing. I think we're moving forward, and the bylaw, pardon me, the amendment bylaw, the amendment is kind of more of something to look at how we manage the budget and address percentages for the citizens. Those are my points, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to mention the 4.3 million plus, not including the additional officers from last year of 500,000, and the two for this year for 27,000, I recall, is 2.63% of the 7.01. So the municipal services increase is 4.38 when we're still dealing with inflationary pressures from the previous year, and MPI being much higher than CPI. Municipal price index versus the consumer price index of 4.38 would still be one of the lowest municipal within the region. So that could be used to say, well, let's leave it where it is. It could also be used to say, let's try and do a little bit better. We also may focus on household impact, but the impact on small business, industrial users is also much higher. So every little bit matters to those that are paying the bills. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Your Worship. This one's a tough one for me because the last time we had this conversation, if I remember correctly, it revolved around removing the RCMP officers from the budget, which I didn't support. And when I looked through the non-discretionary budget increases, I don't see a lot that we can continue to shave away without adversely affecting the mechanics of the township, quite frankly. There's a lot of needs. There's not a lot of wants in the non-discretionary budget requests. And so for me, I see this as a compromise in the sense of I'm still going to see these two RCMP officers in the township if they are hired this year, starting in October. I believe that'll still have an impact on improving public safety. And if there's a way that in this environment where people are both owners and renters dealing with a bit of an affordability crisis, I think it's on us to try and do whatever we can. And so that's what I'm wrestling with. And I think it's a compromise in the right direction because at the end of the day, we're still going to have these officers in the township if we get them from Depot. So I'm looking favorably on the direction we're going in. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, call the question on that amendment to I1. That carries. Councillor Richter, Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Martin's opposed. That I have a second amendment, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Bailey. Let's process this amendment. That the capital projects reserve additional annual contribution in the 2024 base budget be reduced by an additional 100,000. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Rent. Is there any discussion on that? I can reread it if you wish. That the capital projects reserve additional annual contribution in the 2024 base budget be reduced by an additional 100,000. We reduced it slightly before, and that would reduce the overall tax increase down to 6.88. Is there any discussion on that? Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So I just want to run through it for my own sake. At the last meeting, we reduced the increase to the capital projects reserve. Is that correct?
We'd reduce the increase of the transfer in the base budget, would be more accurate.
Right, okay.
Same difference, but just a little bit different.
Right. So in this case, what you're doing is not reducing the transfer.
We're reducing the additional. So
Yeah.
Ms. Ruff, maybe you could provide that some context.
So we're reducing our transfer, which was at 5 million. We reduced it to 4.75 in the last meeting, and this would bring it down to 4.65.
And doing this doesn't put any projects that we've already pre-approved at risk, is that correct? I'm assuming it wouldn't be okay if we did that anyways.
It does not jeopardize any current projects. It actually would reduce the balance of the capital projects reserve upon conclusion of this budget by an additional 100,000, approximately 9.5 million for 2024.
So 9.5 million would be in the reserve for this year.
But I believe we funded a portion of that. That would be pre the capital funding within the budget. Ms. Ruff, do you want to provide that some context as well?
Well, we funded some projects today as well out of that reserve.
That's right. Yeah.
So we can get you that balance, but I believe it's going to be around 5 million after this budget plus additional funding.
Thank you, Ms. Ruff.
Thank you. Councilor Martins?
Yeah, thank you, and sorry, I was trying to flag, it's really difficult when this isn't in front of me in writing, the amendment, and trying to hear the words and remember the words. So I apologize. I'm going to again ask you for the numbers, what the before and the after amounts are, please.
Go ahead, Mr. Bragan.
All right, Ms. Ruff, did you pick up on that?
So our contribution will be 4.65. Is that the number that we're looking for?
There was a decrease?
It started at 5 million. We decreased at the last meeting 250,000 to 4.75.
Yep.
And now another 100,000 is proposed, so 4.65.
Okay, thank you. And just so I'm clear on, I'm just considering that future capital projects that aren't yet approved, that we're still, waiting on reports back from staff on. I worry that this might have an impact on them if I'm supporting this reduction. So can this number, is this number fixed? And then this is all the capital projects that we can do for the year? I'm just sort of wondering how that works, because ones that are still in the works.
Ms. Ruff?
That would be there would be approximately $8.8 million available in that reserve as there's a carry forward balance. There are other, obviously, accounts that we use to fund projects as well, such as water, sewer, etc.
Perhaps just to elaborate, there's a number of other funds such as CACs, DCCs that can be used to fund capital projects. And what Ms. Ruff is trying to articulate is that this will still have a significant balance. There's other funds and there's other sources of revenue such as use of other reserves or borrowing if that need be the case. So the $100,000 reduction, while it's really a reduction in the contribution to the capital, there still is some significant, amounts available in the reserve and in other programs.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that clarification.
Any other discussion? Call the question on that second amendment. I1. That carries. Councillor Richter opposed. Councillor Bailey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to move an amendment that an environmental scan be done in June of this year. And if there is any excuse me, what's the savings on the movement of the police officers to October again, please? Move that an environmental scan be done in June of this year to see, to identify $114 million, $114,000 in surplus. And if it is identified that the start date of the two officers move back up to July.
So, Mr. Bragan, we could process that potentially in May or June and get some feedback on the timeline for when those officers may be arriving. I mean, previous vacancies have not been filled, so it's unlikely, but Councillor Bailey, I think that's reasonable. Seems like a good idea. It would effectively amount, if we were to be funded and still not arrive, would effectively amount to a transfer into the RCMP reserve anyway. Okay, so is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Rint. Councillor Richter, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask through you to staff, if we did a scan in June and the surplus was identified, is there enough turnaround time to move those start dates up to July?
Timing is always going to be challenging, but I think we need some time to see what the surplus looks like. It's very difficult to predict a surplus, and I think as the mayor pointed out, it's likely that we'd be looking within the RCMP, I guess, operating funding to see how many, what membership complement they're at. So I think 6 months after into the year, we could certainly try, and if we can then be fortunate and have some staff members available in July, that's fine, but perhaps it moves it from July to October, depending upon the availability of the members. The funding there would certainly help.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bracken, from what I remember, last time we looked at this, there were approximately 25 vacancies. So I think that speaks for itself. Councilor Martins?
Yeah, and just sort of similar line of questioning. I understand there's vacancies, and I understand that there's also lineup of requests, and if we wait until June to even extend the request for these two members, does that not delay that whole process of getting ourselves in the queue, in lineup for future members?
It would delay it as to the two members we're talking about, and the reason I say that is because by the time this is rolling through the system, it's unlikely that we're going to get members at any specific time. What we're really saying is if all of a sudden Depot finds that there was two members that were surplus because another community or communities had determined they weren't necessary or something had occurred, we'd be first in line for the, I guess, on a waiting list, if you will, as opposed to trying to actually get the complement out of Depot directly.
Thank you, and I support this, and I appreciate the spirit of this this motion. We need more police.
Call the question on that motion under I1. That carries unanimously. Item I2, user pay utility rate bylaws, bylaw number 5978, 5979, 5980 for final adoption. Moved by Councillor Rent, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Is there any discussion on I2? No. Call the question on I2. That carries unanimously. Mayor and council report. Does anybody wish to make a report? Nope. Just going to turn your mic on. Go ahead, Councilor Bailey.
I handed out a sheet here dealing with firefighters' presumptive cancer coverage. The reason I do that is January is a month to an awareness month for these 20 cancers that are currently listed as the #1 killer of firefighters in British Columbia. This is extremely important because some of the things that are put in place to keep everyone safe, such as fire retardants, and PBDEs are the chemical abbreviation for it, are actually, when they do burn, are extremely carcinogenic. More research now has found out that the Nomex material that is in our turnout gear actually has a carcinogenic property in it. So now every time firefighters don their PPE to go and do their job, they are putting themselves at risk that they cannot avoid. If you look, I am extremely proud of the work that the BCPFFA has done to bring it up into the 21st century. As you look in there are 3 reproductive cancers that are females. And that is a huge step ahead for the industry in that. I was one of the 2 drivers for the first 7 in 2005. Extremely proud that we put that through. The other person that was with me was Local 18, Robert Hall, who is now dead because of a cancer. I have had 2 occupational cancers. So if anyone thinks that this does not apply to our firefighters and their safety, and especially their families and how they suffer during the time when their loved one is going through cancer treatment, think again. This is a month to reflect on our firefighters, and it is appropriate that we just hired 19 firefighters. And by putting more firefighters on the floor, it will also help to lessen exposures. And they're finding more and more with cancer research that stress is a huge contributor to cancers. So thank you to this council for hiring more firefighters and for trying to take care of it. Also for, in the budget, we put in some money there that will make it better by getting better gear, more gear, and up-to-date gear. So thank you very much, and please think of your firefighters. Paid on call, volunteer, exempt, professional, it doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Ferguson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that the weather has been a little bit difficult for our citizens and folks around the province and the region. You know, it's important for people to look after their plumbing and themselves, of course. If I may, through the chair to staff, any news on either facilities or some of our utilities regarding freezing or other challenges, if I may?
Thank you, Your Worship. From the engineering perspective, there's been no noted concerns, but I can look further into it if so directed.
I think it's just important to note and pass on to the citizens. I mean, I know a phone rings by our staff, good staff, responding to people the best they can regarding frozen pipes. I even have frozen pipes at my own house. So it's important to watch those, and because when the thawing does come, you might want to shut off some of your valves because the pressure might break some. I hope that doesn't happen, but it can happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other Mayor and Council report, Metro Vancouver Regional Committee Representatives report? Nope, seeing none. I'll move on to L1, motion to reconsider. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Van Popta. I'll call the question on reconsideration of L1. That carries unanimously. I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Rent. So just want to skip straight to referral. If that fails, then we'll debate the main motion. Ms. Bauer, I'm going to move that referral. Is there a seconder to that referral? Seconded by Councillor Rent. Ms. Bauer, if you could bring it up, please. Yeah. I don't know how to use this thing. Which number am I? 3? There we go. So could you slide it down, Ms. Bauer, so we can see the whole thing? That is all there is to it. It is items 1 to 7. So that has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the referral? Councillor Richter.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's very unfortunate that the township has now been involved in a lawsuit because the majority of council decided to push this through without checking on legal ramifications of doing so. So I've got some questions around this, starting with what exactly are these going to change? I mean, this is the first time I'm seeing this. Will legal advice be obtained on these and shared with all of council? My third question is what happens to the lawsuit?
What was the first one?
What's going to change as a result of these items? What specifically? Because the lawsuit is concerned about the northern portion, not the southern portion. What happens to the lawsuit, and will the landowners be properly consulted this time, particularly those in the northern portion?
Mr. Bracken, do you have all those?
I will give it a shot, Your Worship. We'll see. I may miss some, we can come back to them. So I think the intent of the motion globally is to actually deal with some concerns that have been raised by area residents in terms of some of the process and some of the substance that may be going forward, and it seeks to get clarification then in terms of what some of those processes and substance may actually mean. So in this case then, we're looking at trying to respond to those concerns that were raised, if you will, taking a sober second look at them, and then attempting to advance with whatever direction council seems fit after that period of time. Throughout that process and just looking at the list, I think we'd have to say that it is Likely, we would enlist legal counsel's assistance through that process to ensure that we're responding appropriately to any concerns that may have been raised. And I think it's also safe to say that in doing so, we'd be very open-minded in that process, ensuring that the spirit and intent of the Weymouth Neighborhood Plan is actually upheld. As we go forward, then, I guess the question would then arise, well, what does this do to the process or proceedings that are underway? They would have to be then, I guess, at least paused until this process was complete, because at this point, then, the thing that they are challenging has been brought back before council for reconsideration, and that would be premature to advance until that reconsideration was actually complete. So I think that may have addressed most of the points.
Okay, well, I still see on number 5 here, the location for a civic institutional use within a regionally designated employment lands and business park area, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the crux of the issue here. I have never sat through a public hearing before where a lawyer for the proponents addressed council at the time and said the owners of those lands were not properly consulted. There was not proper due diligence shown to those people, and proper due diligence is required. It is unfortunate that the motion that some council members brought to refer this for legal advice was defeated by a majority of council. It's also unfortunate that the option to defer consideration of this for another meeting, which would have allowed councillors to seek legal advice, was also defeated by a majority of council members. I think council is in strong need of legal advice on this, and I would like to refer this referral to legal counsel for a report to staff before it's considered.
Ms. Bauer, I think that would, can you refer a referral? Can you just confirm for me?
Unfortunately, the current procedure bylaw does not allow us to go one level further once the referral is reached. We have to dispose of this referral and then.
So if council wishes that, they could vote this referral down.
Okay,
and
but
then proceed with
I
that.
have no evidence, and I have a lot of concerns that this particular referral may aggravate the current legal situation that the township faces.
Mr. Bracken, do you want to address that?
Aggravation, I suppose, is probably not the best term to use. What this would do, I say, is probably pause, depending upon what the outcome of this is, because we have a bylaw that has been adopted. This reconsideration has indicated the adoption has been lifted and we're effectively at third reading. From that point of view, it's been referred to staff then to look at further amendments or considerations of the bylaw that's been put before council. And at that point, then, once that process is concluded, reported back to council, and presumably some form of bylaw adopted, then it would be back to any proceedings that may be out there that may have to be altered, amended, discontinued, or proceed, depending upon what the outcome of this process is. But it does then satisfy the need for that sober second look, as we're calling it.
Takes it back to.
Well,
Excuse me, I said third reading, I should have said second reading, sorry.
okay,
It was reconsideration of third and final. That's correct.
so we're reconsidering it, but
Nope.
we're not really reconsidering it. We're just simply referring it back to staff for review and consideration. Again,
Ms. Bauer, maybe you
we
could
need
explain the
legal
process.
advice.
Maybe you could explain the process. This is now consideration
Mr.
of.
Mayor, I had the floor. You're speaking over me. Will you please
No,
stop
you're
doing that?
potentially confusing the situation further. Ms. Bauer, could you please what's happening is third and final is back on the table, and third and final is being referred back to staff, which means the bylaw would be unadopted and referred back to staff. If you could just clarify that that's correct, as opposed to the way Councilor Richter represented it.
It is correct. At
Yep.
this point, third and final is on the table. So the action taken is that third and final route, we would refer that back to staff for information.
So the bylaw is no longer adopted, it no longer exists. It's now back to staff to be worked
Okay,
on further.
but the crux of the lawsuit is that the people who own land in the northern part of the plan were not properly consulted. Is this referral going to ensure that some sort of proper due diligence and consultation occurs with them.
It's challenging,
I don't see
Councillor
that
Richter.
happening because you're just referring it back to staff.
Well, you're making factual statements. Whether or not there was.
Mr. Mayor, I know how to speak my mind. I don't need you to interpret it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
If I could just interject, because you are representing that it is factual, that that sufficient consultation
There is a lawsuit.
did
That's
not
a
occur.
fact.
Those are claims that are untested, Councillor Richter.
No, but there is a lawsuit in front
Mr.
of the
Backen, maybe
courts.
you can clarify. Those are untested claims, and we are all directors of the corporation and should act like it. Councillor Richter, if you could please not state something as factual when it is not tested in court.
Your Worship, if I could interject, I think it's just a matter of concern because, of course, there is an audience. This is a public forum, and I think the concern is simply that statements that may be made, albeit well-intentioned, can have a negative impact if they're not carefully described. And I think here the description really is, well, what about the public processes? Has there been adequate consultation? I'd refer it to point number 2 that shows that one of the things that staff are to consider is options to streamline and improve the flexibility and responsiveness of the neighborhood planning process. That would include consultation as being part of that process, and the challenge we have is only trying to predict what that consultation may look like or what form it may take until there's been some time to review this in totality, which would be done in conjunction with the appropriate advisors and in conjunction with the residents who are affected by it to make sure that they can come away feeling that they've been adequately consulted, which is, again, different than actually getting a specific result, but simply enhancing the process.
So, are members of council allowed to get additional input on this from the people who were affected by it?
By reconsideration of third and final, we're effectively back at the second level. So in all likelihood, this would require then to take these revisions back to the public for additional consultation by way of a public hearing. Haven't really thought that through yet. And that would allow council then to have more input as part of that process.
Well, I think it's incredibly unfortunate that we're sitting in this position right now. And I think that going forward, we should be a little more judicious in how we ram things through. This should not be happening. It should never have happened in the first place. We should have been allowed to get legal advice on it. I hope we're still going to get legal advice on it, but I'm not going to support this referral. Thank you.
Councillor Martins.
Thank you. Just changing gears a little bit, I have a question with regards to the referral we're looking at in front of our screen on points 1 through 7. Because I don't have the original referral when we discuss this as a council, I'm just wondering, is this in fact the exact same, or is there any if staff could just clarify for me, are there any points that have changed? Or if you're allowed to tell me that, it would be really helpful to me because I didn't have that information in front of me in the package here. I'm just wondering if we're comparing apples to apples on this.
Mr. Backen.
I'd characterize it this way, Your Worship. The language is certainly different, but we think it likely encompasses some of the issues that were previously raised and probably expands upon them somewhat in terms of the totality of the breadth of the referral. It allows us to reset and look at this with a different light, and I think it was, and from my position, it does have different language, but would embrace what was previously considered at least and probably expand upon it.
Okay, and are you able to expand on what the different language is here?
Well, the language I'm referring to is really just the verbiage because it's different layout, different sentence structure, et cetera. I think it's more the substance that we're looking at, and when we look at the substance, the 7 points are very thorough, dealing with not only the process, the path forward, the consultation, but some of the suggested uses that may have to be looked at, their appropriateness, the applicability of them, the interaction of those uses, and is finally, I guess, looking at what that would even entail. Could it even entail some sort of single family component, which we know it would, but then also measuring that all against the impact that there may be from Metro Vancouver vis-a-vis employment lands and the implications that this would all have on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kunst.
Yeah, I'm not supporting this, but I obviously have a lot of questions. Initially, when this came to the table weeks ago, this was already something that we should have never done. And I'm pretty sure every seasoned person on this council table probably knew that, and somehow here we are now. We have a lawsuit. I'm interested in finding a little bit more about number 6. The current equitability of CACs within the Williams Neighborhood Plan and Council policy as amended. So what does that mean? So does that mean that the people who had already given us CACs for their property or for their application, that we're now going to go back and ask for more, or this is not as equitable as, so maybe the mayor can answer that?
Yeah, no, I would direct you to the first sentence, and maybe Mr. Bracken can add to it, but referred back to staff to further review and consideration of. So that is at the beginning of each one. So it would be to further review and consider, not necessarily direct.
So back to number 6.
It would be for staff to review and consider number 6.
Okay, so I'm just wondering why number 6 is there. Like, because right now we think maybe it's not equitable?
I'll leave that up to staff to work on.
But was this not your referral?
Mr. Bracken, so you can help on the process again.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a bit of a fine line one has to walk. We're not saying it's not equitable. We're not saying it's equitable. We haven't examined it yet. What we have heard from some of the concerns of the community is that they'd like to understand how it fits within our overall scheme, and they'd like to understand how the equity reaches, or how these are equitable amongst these other uses within the plan itself and outside of the plan as well with other areas. So again, the challenge in answering the question directly is it could create the presumption of a conclusion, which we're not at yet. We're trying to be very open-minded in terms of this process, and we're looking at basically the equity of the program, that being the I guess the community amenity contributions, to ensure they're properly adjusted to reflect both the residential, the employment lands, and anything else that may exist in between.
Okay, so I just have one last question. Is it wise to actually, go through all these 7 things to refer it back in the middle of a lawsuit?
Mr. Bracken?
Well, in part, I think this is actually taking a look at the petition and the claims that are made and trying to address some of those issues, or if not, maybe not address them, but at least take a sober second look at them to ensure that there is further consideration given prior to advancing. That can include such things as equity and also consultation. So I think it's perfectly compatible with that at this point, because I'm not predicting how council will respond to the report or what it may look like, because we're back at second reading. It could take a much different path than we've seen recently, or that we've seen from the planning process itself that happened many years ago.
So you mentioned something about a public hearing. That was one of my questions. Is that now are we going to go back to having a public hearing on this?
My understanding is it's highly likely, and why I'm qualifying that is simply because we're back at second reading. There'll be further submissions obtained. If those submissions are material and significant, which I expect they will be, that will necessitate a public hearing. If there was to be no further submissions, council will then have the option of saying we could rely on the previous process, arguably, but I think we would still suggest that there be a public hearing that takes place, given all of this, just to make sure that the broader community could be consulted and not those merely within the plan area itself.
Okay, and one last thing. I would like to maybe make a motion, depending on how this goes, kind of similar to one that I made, earlier, that maybe before we do anything, that we get legal advice before we even do this, especially now that we're in the middle of a lawsuit.
Your Worship, I think that might be served simply by adding the 8th condition, which would be to obtain additional legal advice on the process and the previous, I guess, elements, points 1 to 7 contained herein.
So if I could, I would maybe do similar just for 2 weeks until we get legal advice. That would be my motion.
So that you're deferring, and then you're moving to deferral?
Deferring the referral until 2 weeks.
I can come back to you. Councillor Bailey?
So after the public hearing, we can no longer receive any additional information from proponents, correct?
Correct.
So if this goes through, then this will trigger that negotiations between the 2 parties can resume. Am I correct?
correct, and I think where you're headed, forgive me for being presumptuous, is that because there may be input received from council members or provided to council members, that in and of itself arguably would create the need for a public hearing.
Thank you.
Councilor Richter?
Yeah, well, I happen to agree with what Councillor Kuntz is saying. I think we need legal advice on this. Mr. Backen, you said earlier you're not sure if another public hearing will be held, and then you're saying this is now back at second reading. I'm worried about the wording in this, because it doesn't say anything in here about we're at back at second hearing now, or second reading now. And shouldn't that be, like the devil's in the details, shouldn't that be clearly specified?
I mean, Mr. Backen, it's at second reading, so we're referring back consideration of third, so I'm not sure what's
sorry, Mr.
required
Mayor,
to be
you're not a
explained here.
lawyer, and I don't accept your explanation on it. I'd like legal advice.
It's more of a process issue than a legal thing, Mr. Backen.
No,
I don't
the
think you need to be a
whole thing is
lawyer
legal.
to understand what second reading is. Mr. Backen, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the confusion exists that the reconsideration, which effectively takes us back to second reading, has already occurred. The clerk can verify that we are now at second reading. And then the technical point being made as to the public hearing was, and I hate to be so technical, but there are a number of theoretical ways that maybe there wouldn't need to be a public hearing, such as no further input, no significant changes, things of that nature, which are highly unlikely to occur, so they're very much theoretical. What's more likely to happen is that there will be additional dialogue, additional information that in and of itself will trigger the public hearing need, because then once there are some changes, it's then simply required. Once there's either additional input or changes, it's going to be a requirement, but I have to advise as to the theoretical and not merely the practical. As we then advance it then to the concept in terms of the legal advice, I would just say this: there is a bit of a distinction between what was being suggested and what the motion may look at like. There is the ability to defer to obtain. I was suggesting, though, that we add a point 8 to this as an amendment, that we obtain legal advice throughout and during the process, and that would allow us to advance matters in a fashion, but it's simply up to council in terms of what they feel most comfortable with.
Thank you, Mr. Backen. I appreciate that. I still think that what Councillor Kunst is suggesting, that we get legal advice first, just not deal with this particular referral until we've had that legal advice, is the wisest course of option. Thank you.
Councillor Kunst?
So what happens to the applications that are at third reading currently?
Sorry, someone was whispering in my ear. Go
Oh,
ahead,
okay.
please.
What happens to some of the applications that are at third reading right now in the Williams neighborhood plan?
They would remain unaffected by this because because the plan had been amended, they would have been affected if the plan had remained in place. That plan is now being reconsidered and brought back to second, so they're at the status as they were previously, which is they remain alive and sitting there waiting for either this plan to develop or them to go their own course and advance matters. So some of those applications were in a hiatus because the applicants had to advance matters, consultants' reports, whatever it may be, finishing off with some infrastructure. They can continue with that program as they could unaffected prior to it, and they're aware that there is this overarching consideration before council.
So in the last meeting, I think that we talked about phasing development there and delaying and all this kind of stuff. How does that come into this particular referral?
Mr. Backen?
Those could be outputs from the referral. Again, there was discussions of those, but the situation we're at here is unchanged from prior to the adoption of the proposed revisions. So where we would sit right now is those would remain alive, and it would be really dependent upon what the ultimate result of this process is with after these amendments that are before you are considered and reported back to council, and council deliberates and provides some direction.
No other speakers, Councillor Kunst. If you have an amendment or a motion, go ahead.
Yeah, my motion would be that we defer this for 2 weeks or until the next meeting for legal advice.
Is there seconded? And See, open. There we go. So that's a deferral, moved and seconded. Seeing no speakers on deferral, I think that a second motion, Mr. Backen, to run them concurrently as you, I think, rationally suggested, perfectly works fine. We can get on with this referral and legal advice can be sought. This is, there's a number of items here. Number 1, dealing with Bill 44. Number 3, dealing with some other feedback. Number 3, dealing with some other feedback and some issues identified in number 7. So I believe that Mr. Backen, these could run concurrently. You can provide legal advice. So I see no reason to hold this up. I certainly don't support it. So with that, I'll call the question on the deferral of L1. The deferral is defeated with Councillor Rint, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Van Popte, Councillor Pratt, Councillor Martins, Councillor Ferguson opposed. Now back to the main motion. Councillor Kunz, did you have anything else on the referral?
No.
Great. So I'll call the question. Oh, Councillor Pratt, go ahead.
Are we needing that 8th item added if we were to want concurrent legal advice?
Mr. Backen, I believe, given the ongoing situation, you'll be seeking legal advice, which can be provided to council. So I don't see the need for it, but if you do, you can add it.
I would so move to add an 8th clause that legal advice would be sought concurrent with items 1 through 7.
Okay, that would be amendment, seconded by Councillor Martins. Is there any other discussion on that? Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question on that amendment. That carries unanimously. So now back to the referral as amended. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, call the question on the referral of L1. That carries. Councillor Richter, Councillor Kunst opposed. Given we're at 2:45, why don't we take a 5-minute break and return in about 5 minutes and start with item N1. Councillor Richter, did you have something? No? Good.
I feel like I should have a top hat and a cane.
Okay, we'll get back underway. Item N1 through 7. Is there any questions or discussion on items N1 through 7 for information? Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, is it Wolf? I
Yes.
was wondering if council, I don't know what the process would just be to allow that request to be approved by council?
So back in item 3, I believe, is a request for a deposit to be returned where the proponent can't meet the conditions on any known timeline. So, Councillor Ferguson, just to make a motion to return that
Yes,
deposit
I
and
would like to
discharge
make-
the restrictive covenant. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Bailey. Yeah, so it's on the floor. Councillor Ferguson, anything else on that?
No, that's it.
Councillor Van Popta?
Sorry, can I clarify, is it just for the first lot or for both lots that you want to return it? It could only be returned on the first lot, because it's where they've only.
The one he's requested, that's
Oh, okay.
the one he's requested.
Mr. Richardson, maybe you can clarify?
Through your worship, correct. There's one lot that has been connected and one remaining, which is the $7,500 amount.
So it is only to return it for one lot, just to clarify that.
So it's to return for the lot that's connected?
For no, that's not connected.
Oh.
Mr. Richardson?
I
maybe
don't want to
clar-
return the deposit if it's not
Well,
connected.
then you can vote against it. Councillor.
That's what I'm confused. What are we returning?
Yeah, Mr. Richardson, maybe start from the beginning.
Oh, thank you, worship. So the subject application was of a two-lot subdivision, and there was a deposit as direction of council, a security deposit of $15,000, which was $7,500 per lot, to provide for water connections when those services are available, as well as a covenant on title indicating that when water service is available, that they be connected. Since that time, one of the two lots has connected to municipal water service. The second one is not. The individual has asked, given that there's no specific timeline currently anticipated for a municipal service to be available to the second lot, that $7,500 be returned, as well as discharge the covenant that's applicable to the remaining property.
So we're not anticipated to bring water services to the second lot, but we are to the first lot?
Through to
Or are they just not wanting to connect to the second lot? Because then I don't think we should be discharging it, which is the purpose of having the
I
deposit.
believe, Mr. Richardson, the first lot is connected, and in order to connect the second lot, services would have to be extended in a rather lengthy loop for the engineering to work.
Okay, that's what I'm.
Cost prohibitive for one lot to provide that, so the condition cannot be met, and it's been a decade. Mr.
Okay, if
Richardson,
the
maybe
condition can't be met, that's fine.
clarify that the condition cannot be met without a significant expenditure.
your comments are correct, your worship.
Okay, that's
So
fine.
that's the context
Okay.
for that. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, did we discuss N2 yet?
We're still on a motion to grant the request under N3.
Okay. I'd like to bring up N2 when N3 is done then. Thank you.
Seeing no other discussion, I call the question on N3. That carries unanimously. Councillor Van Popta, you
Nope.
clear? Good. Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this N2 report, because this is on the Smith Athletic Park Youth Soccer Campus. Is it correct that the price tag is now $154.7 million?
Mr. Braga?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe one of the options does refer to that, and then there's a secondary option, but I'll let Mr. Winslade start the explanation.
Your Worship, the purpose of this report is to bring forward all of the information for all the possible phases of the Smith Athletic Campus and Youth Soccer Campus. The totals of everything being referred to is on page 9. It does add up to $154.7 million. It includes site preparation, it includes a lot of off-site works, roads and the like, as well as the actual park. So we wanted to provide all that information to council, so they had the info as they consider this further down the road.
Okay, so we had the ice rinks that went to $151 million from the original under $100 million estimate. And now we've got this soccer campus at $154.7 million. Like, that's over $300 million being spent on basically two user groups in the community. Like, how does that work?
Sounds like
This
the political...
money been set aside in the budget, this $154.7 million?
Ms. Ruff?
That project is not funded in the budget.
It's not funded, okay. So does that mean it's not being built this year?
Bracken?
Your worship, I'll start it off. I think the confusion exists in terms of the totality for the price of the, or the cost of the program, and as well kind of a incremental approach to trying to actually proceed with the program. The property, as you're aware here on the screen, shows the ultimate design that's been suggested, and there's still some more refinements to actually take place, and that has a couple of price tags, or maybe an infinite number of price tags, depending on some of the options selected. At the end of the day, the numbers that are being talked about are in the range as being suggested, and I believe one of the things the council can consider, either today or very soon, is to start the land works and the clearing and the excavation that's necessary to launch the program, and then that will allow us some time to determine the ultimate funding structure. Mr. Winsley, perhaps you could add?
That's correct. Everything that Mr. Bracken just said, and the only thing that I would probably add is, sometimes in different community parks, in different situations, a lot of the infrastructure exists. The roads are there, the water's there, the sewer's there, et cetera. In this situation, it's not yet, as development is just beginning to, I guess, occur in that area. So the overall report outlines all of those issues, both on-site and off-site, in terms of the ultimate. However, council may choose to phase that and provide partial funding, et cetera. And the only other thing I think I would just try to clarify is council gave some direction to staff to come back with some designs and some estimates. So this is actually the first time that there's been a budget estimate and overall package put together for this project. In the past, there's been maybe some different envelopes and things, but this is actually the first time, and that's why it's just for council information, so they can ask questions and start to identify issues.
Okay, so I recall us having a discussion when we were talking about the new rinks that are being built and the user groups that would benefit from that being around, I believe the number was 3,000 to 4,000 people. And now we've got $154.7 million being used for basically one sport, although I think rugby can probably get in there too. But my understanding is the soccer group has a membership of about 7,000 people. It seems to me we're spending an awful lot of money on not an awful lot of residents. And so I'm just wondering when we're going to have the discussion about this. I mean, it says here in the report the first stage could be 40 million, but apparently we've gone beyond having one phase. We're going to have two phases. So how much of the 154.7 million will be spent now on these two phases that are going to be done?
I believe that would be waiting for future or current council direction.
Yeah, and Your Worship, we've tried to structure the report in such a way that one section builds upon the previous, so it's kind of a story as you go through in terms of different options, from what maybe is just 2 fields to 3 to an indoor facility and not an indoor facility. There's some numbers regarding council asked us to analyze parking, so there's at-grade parking analyzed along with some analysis for underground parking, and try to provide as much information for council so that with some further direction we could further refine those numbers, timeline, et cetera.
Okay, well, I think this goes back to an issue that we've had come up over the past year about the need for council to sit down and put some priorities together. And I think we need to start looking at the price tags on these priorities, because that's an awful lot of money. We've never spent that kind of money in one term. Like $300 million on recreation facilities. And yet I don't feel that council as a whole has had a full and robust discussion around this. Anyway, thank you very much for answering my questions, Mr. Winside. I appreciate it.
Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, looking at this whole proposal here, it strikes to me that there is an opportunity for an awful lot of possible outside funding. I'm looking at the fees from Metro and TransLink to see if we could get exempted from them. I'm looking at school board has conditions in there that I would be talking to the school board about throwing some money in, provincial and federal, especially when they're talking about such things as hosting events for World Cup. And I think has there been a hunting list, if you want to put it any better than that, regarding potential funders that we could approach? Because to me, it seems like there is an awful lot of potential here for getting funding, especially when I'm looking at 4 different levels of government. Has this been done?
Yeah, Your Worship. A few of those discussions, they're all great suggestions, and a few of them would probably, be initiated at the council level. At the staff level, for sure, we're constantly looking for different grant opportunities through the different programs, and Mr. Chapman does a great job of identifying those for us. We've identified at least one so far, which is to do with use of wood, if council wanted to go that direction. There's also some funds that can be recouped from the area to do with the storm detention and others. So we do have a number of other possible funding sources. They're not outlined in this report, but that's something we can consider further.
Yeah, and in reference to sports, I got a pretty significant background, both playing and coaching, and being involved with schools. And sports aren't just for rich elite kids and that kind of stuff, and it's not just for getting out and running around on a field. We're talking about giving kids opportunities to have outlet, especially the kids that are in the towers or in the densified areas, where they can go out there, they can interact and socially be a lot more adaptable and less susceptible to gangs and other forms in society that are dragging it down. So I don't just see sports as a physical thing. I see it as a mental, and I also see it as, and I know the benefits personally of seeing how kids benefit and become better people from sports. And soccer, to me, while I have very limited time playing and coaching it, is one that is very affordable. It's not near as expensive as hockey or some of our other expensive sports. So I see this as reaching out. And also I would add another one from my background is I will definitely be talking to the people on this one regarding access for field lacrosse and women's field lacrosse also.
Councilor Martins?
Thank you. And thank you to staff for this report. It's very in-depth, and I really appreciated reading through this information. I really enjoyed when it got to the possibility of how this facility could be used down the road, bringing in world-class events. And as I read that, it reminded me of the summer. A few of us were at McLeod Athletic Park at the National Track and Field Championships, and actually seeing Andre DeGrasse racing in Langley on our track was a pretty incredible moment. And I think it's really great to see that Langley is really embracing this sort of thing, and we're putting our name on the map for, I think, a lot higher level of stuff down the road. I think what's helpful for me is, I know we're talking about user groups, but is there a way, and I don't know if this is even possible, rather than looking at groups, looking at numbers, is there a way for staff to somehow quantify an idea, if we have these existing fields, what the usage would be numbers-wise, if that's even possible? Because when I'm looking at this, it seems to me that there's a lot that can be going on at this facility. It kind of reminds me of out in Richmond at the Oval, and so many things happening and so many people involved. Is there any possible way to quantify the usage numbers? Because I think that would be helpful information.
Your Worship, we definitely could pull that information together. I know Langley United Youth Soccer in particular already has a lot of detailed stats numbers, and I neglected to mention them as a possible funding source before, but I know they have made a commitment to us towards this project as well. The high school, the new high school and middle school are planned to be immediately east of this site, so definitely a lot of usage there.
Councillor Bailey referenced field lacrosse and rugby and other users. So staff could make an estimate, bring that back to council in terms of the number of hours that would get utilized. The other is, although this is focused on, Smith Athletic Park, there is quite a bit of passive space and other possibilities in this space. I believe Director Groves in the report may have referred to it, but the possibility of dog off-leash areas, playground spaces, you can see a pathway all the way around the site, et cetera. So those numbers are a little bit harder to quantify, but we can definitely bring back the user group numbers.
Councilor Pratt.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm glad Mr. Winslade brought up the more passive aspects of the park there at the end, because that was one of my big questions. And I think the township, we're well known, and we know that we can execute really well on creating amazing programmed spaces and spaces for a lot of different user groups. But I think one thing that I hear quite often, especially in our denser neighborhoods, is that there's less space than needed for unprogrammed activity, whether it just be a public backyard or somebody not having to, sit down on a soccer field. They want a commons, right? And so I am curious, maybe if Mr. Groves or Mr. Winslade can touch, as we're looking at this diagram here, where the potential kind of passive space might be, or I know that there's a potential location off this site that would provide a lot of great trails and things like that. But again, I'm sort of touching on a bit more of a public backyard, so to speak.
Sure. I'll maybe just handle it because I believe after this discussion, we'll likely be bringing back more information. Maybe we could do a presentation in a little bit more detail. Mr. Groves could prepare. But immediately to the north of the soccer field that goes the east-west connection that has the blue line around it on this diagram you're looking at would potentially be the covered field. Immediately north of that towards 76th Avenue, although it doesn't look really large maybe on this drawing, it's actually quite a significant buffer. Scott, do you know how many meters that is roughly? Is it? Yeah, about 40 meters. So it's pretty significant. And that's the area we've identified for more passive space, dog off-leash space. There's a lot of walking that happens in this area, so trying to recognize and instill some of that now into the park. So that whole north area there is pretty significant. Up in the top right, which is the northeast corner of the site, those trails connect to some of the existing development in the area. And then to the south, that trail that traverses the site there connects to future development in the south. So there's quite a good trail connection. And that's in that same probably 30 meter or so buffer on that east side. And again, it's not detailed enough, but there would be potentially playgrounds and areas like that in these spaces. Right now, we've focused really on getting the athletic surfaces in the right orientation, dealing with the detention pond and those types of things. The middle school would be most likely the closest school. And you can kind of see in an east-west direction through the middle of the site between the three south fields and the building to the north. Again, there's quite a wide spine that's seen as a great active and passive space. And it actually connects across to what would be the schools on the east side of the site. So those are some of the highlights, but we could come back with some more detail. But definitely all of our, even though we may call them like Alder Grove Athletic Park, as you know, there's basketball courts, there's skateboard, there's picnic shelters, there's passive shelter areas that council created just last year, and all kinds of different areas for people to use picnic shelters, et cetera. So.
I appreciate that. And just in the spirit of getting in as much information before making any decisions down the road, it touches in the report on the options between surface and underground parking. And I look at the surface parking there in the northwest corner as a pretty sizable kind of asphalt surface, right? And I'm wondering if more information in the subsequent reports can be made available to us about the cost and the options between undergrounding it and not having surface parking above and potentially making that additional passive space or using that for some other purpose. I'd be curious to see how staff would either say it's now underparked or sufficiently parked. So that would be great. And then just as a last kind of question, maybe this can come forward again in a subsequent report. For the potential indoor field, obviously council, we've had inquiries from other user groups about indoor space. Is there the possibility that this indoor space can be used for sports besides just soccer? I know that ideally it's configured for one, but is there the possibility that it could be configured for 2 or 3 or 4 based on the size? And if we're going to cover it and spend the money covering it, can it be made multi-purpose?
Your Worship, a number of really good questions there. Just on the parking, to start at a very high level, we did a similar analysis here that we did at the Arenas project that we discussed with Council. The Arenas project, because of the soil conditions and the value of the land and a number of other issues, was very, I guess, close in terms of that comparison. Here with this site, unfortunately, mostly due to the piling and that would be required in the soil conditions, et cetera, it's a fairly significant gap between surface parking, which if you include the value of the parking and the land, I think was in the ballpark of about $10 million, $8 million, thanks, Scott. And underground was more like 25 to 27 million, I think. So some of those numbers may be in the report, some of them we may have available for further discussion. But we went away from the underground parking in this specific scenario just because it's such a large difference. But we can definitely bring more details about that when we discuss it further. The second point about the use of the indoor space, definitely, although our focus has been on soccer and making sure we meet all the requirements for the highest level of soccer in this indoor space, it's also potentially, the current design can divide it into, I think, 4 different fields, 4 different areas with curtaining, just similar to how they divide gymnasiums in some cases. And you could definitely, depending on the age group, have 4 different games going at a time in that scenario for soccer. But also, due to one of the back and forth, we've really been trying to protect the size of the space, because from a cost point of view, it's the wide span that really drives the cost a little bit. So we've kind of been moving it back and forth, but really trying to protect it as a full-size field that it doesn't exist anywhere else. Everybody else, because of cost reasons, has shrunk it, and you end up with undersized fields that can't really be utilized. So this for sure, soccer, field lacrosse, rugby, anything that indoor baseball training, any sport for sure. We've also had some inquiries from people involved with athletics and track training. Our weather isn't always the most fantastic for that. So they're asking if they could maybe utilize some of the sideline spaces and that for that type of use. So there's a lot that can still be explored once we really get going in the details of it.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Van Popte.
Yeah, going back to Councillor Bailey's commentary on the affordability of soccer. About 88 years ago, my life was very different, and the economics of my life was very different, and the only accessible activity that my kids were interested in that I could afford as a single parent was soccer. And I understand that I think we've hit 600 kids on the waiting list this year. And so it's not something that we can ignore. This is something that we need to address somehow. I like this report because it kind of gives us a smorgasbord of options. We can mix and match how we want to address this or how we want to phase this. So to say that it's 154 million may be true, may not be true. It just depends on what we choose to do with this site. The challenge that we've got is that this council inherited this site. Would I have wanted to put something like this in this area? Not necessarily, but this is what we've been given to work with. It's got extremely challenging conditions, site conditions, the fact that we have to pile it, and if we wanted to proceed with parkade, actually put a roof on the parkade just to put a field on top, is, from a construction point of view, it eats a third of your budget. And so going forward, I like seeing these numbers. I like seeing how we can work with staff and with the user groups on how we can, phase this in and get it done. But the fact of the matter is, even if this was not a soccer campus, even if this was just a regular township park that we were putting beside a school, which we've done all across our communities, it's still a $40 to $50 million project, regardless of the impact to specializing to soccer or not specializing to soccer. So we've got some challenges here that we unfortunately that we've inherited, and we're just going to have to go from there and how we proceed and how we phase it.
Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, there's an awful lot being said, so that's good. I mean, there's a really good report. I thank Mr. Winslade and his team for putting this together. It's we talked a few minutes ago, couldn't have been that long ago, about our budget. And, you know, we have one important part of our budget being protection. This is also a very, very important part of our budget. Park recreation and user groups and others. You know, it's also mentioned earlier on that 7,000 people is not a very large percentage of a community. Well, that's not the case. That might be the registered folk. There's a lot of unregistered people in this community that play soccer, and anywhere from a very young age to the time you can walk to, you know, to people that are not so young anymore. And soccer is something that people play, and it's throughout the whole community, throughout the whole region, because of our climate. Now, you're not seeing so much that today or the last few days, but people play soccer. I was not really much of a soccer player. I played rugby, wasn't very good at that either, but I played it anyway. The fact that we're moving ahead with this, it's a challenging site. You can see site preparations, other things. So I think that it's important to look at this, look at the report. My questions are, you looked at the phasing. In the report, there's another option of budget envelope of 40 million could be considered for first stage and could meet the schedule for opening in summer 2025. Mr. Winslade, would you have a comment regarding this option, if I may?
Not too much other than it's possible. If you wanted some real details, Mr. Groves would be able to come up and speak to that specific option, but it basically would deal with site preparation and some of the outdoor playing areas, if you want.
Thank you. In a supplement question, you can see the, Councillor Van Popka certainly indicated that, the site being difficult. We've also have some road work, and that adds cost to the envelope as well. I'm not sure of the offset, both the 19 million and the site preparation of 22, how much of that is total roads, because we're introducing a new road, and total utilities and other uses regarding infrastructure and otherwise. Do you know what percentage of that, those millions of dollars, if it would be, if I may, through the chair?
Your Worship, I know there's about $7 million that needs to be completed just specific to the site as part of the project to proceed. The other 19, I know, is broken out in our budget requests for the most part that council would have seen, but they're unfunded. Mr. Groves, is that broken out in here in the report? Yeah, it's broken out, and it's probably about 50-50 between road and utilities. So, right, thanks. So about 50-50. So of the 19 million, 9.5 roads, 9.5 other. And there are some things we can do. We've talked again about the phasing. Like 76th Avenue is the one road that exists here, but it's only built to a half standard. The north half of it is built. We could access from 76th Avenue. It's a good news, bad news kind of scenario, because even though this looks like 4 playing fields, the way that soccer in particular utilizes the fields, there can be 400 to 500 youth at a time on these fields because they'll play cross, like 7v7 and versus 11 versus 11. So it's a significant number of people coming and going. That's why we've tried to make sure we build in some of those road improvements to the overall project, because we could probably do without, but then the volume of people is a good news story, but it also means, you know, the parking and some of those road connections will be important for council to consider at the same time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Winslade. In my final comment, Mr. Mayor, is the fact, you know, we've often been accused of, you know, not planning for the future. I think this is an example of planning for the future and preparing for the young people of all ages for the future, if I may. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other discussion on items N1 to 7? Seeing none, we'll move on to P1. Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you. I've got 2 notices of motion here. The first is about the new mayor's contingency fund that's been incorporated into the budget that was just given final reading. And I would like to move that motion as it is written in the agenda.
Is there a seconder to that? Okay, Seconded for discussion. Based upon item 1 being a substantial change to the thing that renders it no longer the original thing, would essentially turn it into a council contingency, combined with number 3, which attempts to fetter future councils, which we cannot do, I am ruling this out of order.
I challenge your decision on that.
Ms. Bauer, do you want to oversee that challenge?
So we have had a challenge to the chair, which means the next vote will be to sustain the chair, meaning you are sustaining the chair, so you're following the chair, or to, if you vote against it, you're therefore voting that the motion was made, or the...
We'd like to do it green for the mayor, red for not the mayor.
Okay, we could do that.
Do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll call the question on challenge of the chair. Go ahead. The mayor does not vote. The mayor does not vote, so I'm just doing it anyway. I gotta label it P1. And the chair is sustained with Councillor Richter, Councillor Kunst opposed. Mr. Councillor Richter, you have a second motion under P2.
Yes, I do have a second motion on the agenda, and I'd like to move it with a change. And that is in the therefores. Therefore, be it resolved that the Township of Langley appoint a new advisory or select committee on policing priorities, reporting directly to council, and ask staff to draw up the appropriate terms of reference for it. And further, be it resolved that Councillor Martins be appointed chair of this new council advisory or select committee. So it's adding the words or select.
Ms. Bauer, you have that?
In front of each committee.
Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Councillor Richter, go ahead.
Oh, you're not going to rule this one out of order?
Go ahead, Councillor Richter.
Thank you. I think that the feedback that council has been getting, and certainly it came through loud and clear in item N1, which was all the comments that came from the public, the importance of policing in this community is very strong within the vision of and the needs of the community. So the original committee, which was a standing committee that was appointed by the mayor and dissolved by the mayor, I think we need to continue on with the Committee on Policing Priorities, and the work that was done by the previous standing committee under the direction of Councillor Martins as chair made excellent progress. I'd like to see that progress continue. And therefore, I think we should have a separate committee on policing priorities reporting to council and chaired by Councillor Martins if she's willing and able to take that challenge on.
Councillor Bailey?
Well, I recognize Councillor Martin's experience in that. Police chairs are always the mayor. If you look at any of the other police chairs, they are always the mayor. I don't know of one exception, and I would strongly advise that Councillor Martin should be on that committee if this committee is formed, but the chair should be the mayor.
Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I think it's not that I disagree with what's being said today regarding the motion. I'm not sure if this is the time to be looking at it, and I know that there's other ways we can look at it now. Earlier on, I mentioned 3 things, as did other members of council. One was policing, the other one was bylaws, third one was fire. Now, whether we could put together, and I think it would have to be a subsequent independent motion or independent notice of motion in the future for simply a kind of safety committee or something like that. Who chairs it? Well, that would have to be determined accordingly. But I just think this is not broad enough right now. Thank you.
Councillor Richter?
Yeah, well, in communities that have a police board, perhaps it is the chair that, but this is not a police board. This is a select committee of council on policing priorities. And council can decide who is the chair or who is not the chair. I've included it in here because I made the assumption that Councillor Martins did excellent work and should be allowed to continue on with the work that she had started in the last year with the standing committee. But the report basically, or the motion basically asks for council to get staff to draw up appropriate terms of reference, and that'll come back to council for approval before any committee is created by council and filled by council. So while I can see the need for a public safety committee, it's clear to me from the feedback on the budget, policing is the committee that needs to have priority right now. So this committee could evolve into a broader committee down the road. That could be a council decision next year or the year after or in the next term. But right now, I think the priority has to be on policing initiatives, and that's why we should be keeping some form of a police priority, because fire has different priorities than policing does, and bylaws has different priorities than policing does. So I hope council will put this committee back in place as a select committee and keep the regular reporting going on policing priorities and initiatives that we've enjoyed the benefit of over the past year. Thank you.
Councillor Rampopta?
Through your worship to staff, can anybody, does anybody know off the top of their heads how many of the police initiatives that have been voted on at this table have come from the previous Police Priorities Committee?
We could probably get that for you, Councillor Rampopta. Did we have that?
We'd have to get that,
We
Your
have to
Worship.
get that.
My understanding
it's
is
a good
that none
question,
of them have actually come from that committee. All policing initiatives have come directly from this table through councillors, through notices of motion. None of them actually came via the committee. In fact, when I actually had questions regarding a notice of motion on policing, I asked for it to be referred to the Policing Priorities and Initiatives Committee, and it was voted down by this council. So from my understanding is that as great as it is for it to have met, it didn't actually accomplish any initiatives out of it. And so if there's maybe going to be, based on what this motion is calling this committee, it appears that it's going to be the same. And, you know, we have to be conscious of staff's time. And if it's not actually going to have initiatives come out of it, as the previous committee did not, then I don't think that, as written, that we're ready for whatever this is going to be.
Okay. Councillor Martins?
Thank you. Couple observations that I have. So first of all, I appreciate the acknowledgement of my skill set, and I appreciate the comments I'm hearing from my council peers here. I do see the value of a separate police committee, as policing issues often require a certain environment to have conversations. I don't think that trumps what Councillor Ferguson was suggesting about having some sort of a collaborative committee with the different agencies, because I see the value to that as well. I found value in our meetings. I don't believe it was coming from initiatives driven and bringing stuff back to council necessarily, so much as opening up communications. And I guess my observation from today's council meeting, the two police officers and comments about them going to the city, things as simple as that could have been brought out in our police committee and have a conversation and actually hear from the OIC and have those conversations about where the people hired have been appointed. And I'm always a fan of communication and conversation. I do not believe that is not valuable. It's just different than perhaps what some people perceive the reason for a committee. But I am going to leave it there. The mayor was very clear that the police standing committee be stood down, and I respect that decision. And while I appreciate being nominated to a chair of a new committee, I do think that for me that's a bit premature. I think that there needs to be determined, if we're doing another committee, what that is, what that looks like. And then I think it needs to be discussion at the council table about which members of council should participate in that committee. So while I really appreciate being acknowledged here, I'm also respectful of the fact that it needs to be for all of council together to have this conversation. Thank you.
Councillor Bailey?
Coming from emergency services, I know that we need a committee on emergency services with all police, fire, and bylaws. And I also, having been on that police priorities committee, know that there are times that police have to talk with no one else in the room. So this motion to me is partially right and partially wrong, and I'd rather burn it down and come forward with a really well thought out and consultative way of going forward, so we can have both police issues discussed in private, and we can have police issues discussed in the total environment of emergency services. I just think that we have to reject this and sit down and come up with a plan that is not piecemeal, have the input from everyone on council, and especially Councillor Martins. She lived this life, and I think that she has to have a loud voice in this kind of thing on how to go forward on this properly. But I don't see this resolution as being as good as it could. So I'd vote against this, and then say I'd like to sit down with staff and other members of council and come up with a much more comprehensive plan dealing with emergency services here, and do it properly rather than just piecemeal like this.
With that, call the question on P2. And that's defeated with Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Bailey, Councillor Rent, Mayor Woodward, Councillor Van Popte, Councillor Pratt, Councillor Martins, Councillor Ferguson opposed. Is there any other business? Seeing none, is there any special closed items? No, get a motion to resolve into special closed. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Pratt. All those in favor? Opposed and carried. Get a motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Pratt, seconded by Councillor Van Popte. All those in favor? Opposed and carried. Thank you.